are important to America, and it's in his hands. It's known as the Appropriation Bill for the Department of Defense. It's known as the Appropriations and Budget for the United States of America. Where are we now? We're on something called a continuing resolution. That means we haven't decided. We can't get an agreement from the Republican leader to move forward on the spending bills for this fiscal year, which began October 1st. We're spending at last year's levels when the Biden administration has asked for more money for the nation's defense. And who is stopping them? The Republican leader. So we can't have it both ways and argue we need to invest more in the defense of America and then stop us from an appropriations process that does just that. Let's get it done. This should have been done before last October 1st, and his cooperation means it can be done now. Now, let me say there's another aspect to it. Many speeches are given about the rise in crime in America. I know this personally, representing a state of Illinois and the great city of Chicago. The number of violent gun crimes in this last calendar year was just shocking. When you look at all of the people that have been hurt and killed with the use of guns in cities across America, it's clear we need to invest in our police force and law enforcement, hold them accountable for the right values and the right conduct, but put in their hands the resources to protect us in our homes and our neighborhoods. What's holding that up? The same decision by the Republican leader not to bring any appropriation bills forward for approval by the Congress. This is just mindless. You can't preach on one hand that you want to fund the police and then stop the appropriation process, which the Republicans in the Senate have done. It is time to pass the omnibus appropriation bill so the resources are going to ATF and to U.S. Attorney's Office and other law enforcement agencies that can help the state and local law enforcement efforts to try to suppress this violent crime. So don't preach about the need for this money and then turn around and stop the effort here on Capitol Hill. Why aren't we voting on an omnibus appropriation bill this week? Why? Why can't we get this done next week? It was supposed to be done last October. It is time for us to do it. And let me say a word about the Ukrainian situation. I feel strongly about this. As a co-chair of the bipartisan Ukrainian caucus, I have followed for years what's been going on in this country. There is one guiding principle that we should acknowledge. The fate and future and decision-making for the Ukrainian people should be in the hands of the Ukrainian people. Not in Washington, not in Moscow, not in Bonn, not in Minsk, but in Kyiv, and the Ukrainian people across that country should have the right to do it. The question about their future and their solidarity and their defense comes down to the fact that they were invaded 8 years ago by Russia, that took over the Crimean province and then went on to expand their military force, the little green men, the so-called little green men that are just Russian surrogates that are fighting in the eastern part of Ukraine. Is it any wonder that the Ukrainian people look to NATO and other forces to protect them? They've been invaded. For 7 or 8 years, they've lost thousands of their citizens innocently who died in defense of their country. And for us to stand in defense of Ukraine and their efforts to make their own decisions for their future just makes sense. Ultimately, we may have theories on what the future should be, but it is their country. They are the people who rule it, and we respect their sovereignty. And I would just say that as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, I know his style. I've seen it for a long, long time. We see the continuing threats that the Russians have against the Baltics, for example. These are small, independent, democratic countries that fought long and hard for that opportunity. And they are constantly menaced by Vladimir Putin and his Russian forces. The same is true for Poland. It's important that we stand behind the NATO alliance, and one way to help the NATO alliance is to pass an appropriation bill that will give our resources promised to the alliance to them instead of being stonewalled as we have been by the Republican leadership on that matter. It's long overdue that we get to that question. I'm glad that Senator Murray's on the floor because the issue I want to raise now is one that she knows well, and I thank her for her leadership. A little bit of history. In 1964, an advisory committee headed by the U.S. Surgeon General issued a landmark report linking cigarette smoking to lung cancer, heart disease, and other deadly diseases. 1964, that was considered to be breakthrough information, that tobacco actually caused cancer. For decades after that, big tobacco companies denied it. They continued to lie to Congress and to the American people about the products they were selling. Tobacco companies knowingly lied to America when they claimed their products didn't cause cancer and weren't addictive. And they lied when they said they weren't targeting children with their products. We know they lied because a trove of 14 million internal industry documents that finally were made public in 1998 as part of the settlement of a lawsuit in Minnesota showed what the 5 major tobacco companies actually knew when they were making public denials. These same documents provided damning evidence against big tobacco in a historic lawsuit brought by attorneys general of 46 states. Let me read you some of the things that executives of big tobacco said about children and smoking in their own internal memos that they thought would never see the light of day. 1981 report by Philip Morris, creator of the Marlboro Man, said, "The overwhelming majority of smokers first begin to smoke while still in their teens. The smoking patterns of teenagers are particularly important to Philip Morris," end of quote. "The base of our business is the high school student," a 1978 memo from the makers of Newport cigarettes. And this from R.J. Reynolds in 1973, the brains behind the cartoon character Joe Camel. Here's what their document said. "The fragile, developing self-image of the young person needs all the support and enhancement it can get. Smoking may appear to enhance that image." Replacement smokers. Those repugnant words were used by big tobacco executives to describe our kids, America's teenagers. If you can hook them young, you'll have them for life. That was their game plan. All of the tobacco industry's deadly deception about kids and tobaccos was supposed to stop. In 2009, Congress passed a landmark law giving the Food and Drug Administration the clear authority and responsibility to regulate tobacco products. That was something big tobacco had fought for decades, but they lost. The Tobacco Control Act requires tobacco companies to obtain FDA approval for any new tobacco products. In a specific report to discourage young people from smoking, the law also bans most flavored cigarettes because of the clear role in hooking kids. When it comes to traditional cigarettes, we have made amazing strides in the time that I've served in Congress. 20 years ago, 30% of high school kids were smokers of cigarettes. Today, fewer than 5%. But tobacco companies didn't take this lying down. They came up with new products to hook kids. E-cigarettes, vaping, little gadgets that turn nicotine-spiked liquids into vapor that's inhaled. It's powerful stuff. One pod of vaping liquid can contain as much nicotine as a whole pack of cigarettes. They came up with flavors to entice children. Tell me, they deny it, but you listen to the names of these flavors and see if they were made for kids or adults. Gummy bears, cotton candy, unicorn poop, Fruit Loops, Skittles, Sweet Tarts. Come on, we know what this is all about. They're enticing kids to take up vaping and e-cigarettes, and it worked. Beginning in 2014, e-cigarettes became the most popular tobacco product used by our kids. Today, nearly 30% of all high school students are vaping. The e-cigarette industry is now worth billions of dollars. And who are the biggest players? Hang on tight. Juul is the #1 seller of e-cigarettes. In 2018, Altria, the producer of the tobacco product Marlboros, and the largest seller of traditional cigarettes, bought a 35% stake in Juul. Altria buying 35% of Juul. Vuse is the second biggest e-cigarette on the market. It's made by R.J. Reynolds, the producer of Camel cigarettes, which caused my father's lung cancer. R.J. Reynolds is the second biggest seller of traditional cigarettes. See any patterns here? We all knew that big tobacco would try to find new ways to addict children on their deadly products. They never quit. which is why the Tobacco Control Act allowed the FDA to establish authority over e-cigarettes. But what we didn't expect was that the Food and Drug Administration would sit back as Big Tobacco dusted off its playbook to ignite, as one former FDA commissioner called, an epidemic of youth vaping in America. For years, teachers warned kids about using Juuls in the classroom. Parents found devices that looked like flash drives for a computer in their kids' backpacks. Even the kids began speaking up about the highly addictive nature of e-cigarettes. Many of us in the Senate demanded that the FDA take action. Senator Murray of Washington, as chair of the HELP committee, has been one of the leaders on this. Countless calls, letters, meetings with FDA commissioners went nowhere. Testimony and alarming data from public health groups and parents yielded no action. The FDA still failed to use its existing statutory authority to police these e-cigarette products, allowing millions of e-cigarettes to flood the market illegally, while their manufacturers made outrageous and substantiated claims downplaying the risk to kids. In 2019, finally, a federal judge stepped in and ordered the FDA to do its job, instructing them to finalize review of e-cigarettes, and remember this date, by September 2021, last September. The FDA's court-ordered deadline to act on pending e-cigarette applications passed 5 months ago. 5 months. Yet incredibly, many of the e-cigarettes that are used mostly by kids, the products that are fueling this epidemic, are still on the market today. The law is clear on this issue. Tobacco companies must prove, they have the burden of proving to the Food and Drug Administration that their product is appropriate for protection of the public health. Why haven't they proved it? Because they can't. There is no evidence of it. So if they can't meet the burden of proof, how do they continue to sell these products on the open market? Meeting that burden was supposed to be a condition precedent, the first thing they had to do to sell these cigarettes. Well, it's because the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is sitting on its hands, is refusing to use its own legal and statutory authority. Big Tobacco continues to be free to target what they call replacement smokers. Those are our kids they're talking about. The Senate is expected to vote soon on a new FDA commissioner. In determining who that person will be, we have the opportunity. Let me change that. We have the responsibility to make it clear that the FDA has to stop dragging its feet. It must use the authority provided by Congress to prohibit tobacco companies from preying on our kids for profit. As Congress evaluates the nominees, we must be guided by the answer to this question. Do we believe that the incoming FDA leadership will correct the failures that have gone before them in allowing these e-cigarettes to prey on our kids? Yesterday, I spoke to Dr. Califf, who is Joe Biden's nominee to be head of the FDA. I've had serious misgivings about whether he is the right person for the job, but I finally relented yesterday and said, yes, Dr. Califf, I'll support you, but if you make it, I'm going to hold you personally responsible for taking control of this issue. Our kids' lives are at stake. We've waited too long. The FDA is set on its hands when it should be moving to protect our kids. It's long overdue. In the interest of our children, I sincerely hope that the leadership of the FDA will open its eyes and do its duty. I yield the floor.
Madam President.